Good day everyone, Dr. Polaris here. The prehistoric survivor trope in cryptozoology is most often associated with the jungles of Central Africa, but alleged sightings of beasts lost in time occur all across the world. One of the more unusual, and not to mention unlikely, places where such creatures have been reported is the UK. Over the years, occasional observations of large flying animals have been made that don't match any of the indigenous species native to Britain. These accounts have come to be seen as evidence for the presence of living pterosaurs, although the earliest reports describe more generic dragons or winged reptiles. Although comparatively rare, there have oddly been tales of living winged reptiles of some kind or another flying around the countryside. At the beginning of the 20th century, there was supposedly a colony of winged serpents lurking about in the woods around Penllyn Castle in Glamorgan, Wales. The creatures were known to fly about in flocks, and although there are no modern sightings, there are still living witnesses who speak of them, such as one elderly resident named Mary Trevelyan, who said, "The woods around Penllyn Castle, Glamorgan, had the reputation of being frequented by flying serpents, and these were the terror of old and young alike. An aged inhabitant of Penllyn, who died a few years ago, said that in his boyhood the winged serpents were described as very beautiful. They were coiled when resting, and looked as if they were covered with jewels of all sorts. Some of them had crests sparkling with all colours of the rainbow. When disturbed, they glided swiftly, sparkling all over, to their hiding places. When angry, they flew over people's heads with outspread wings, bright and sometimes with eyes too, like the feathers in a peacock's tail." He said it was no old story invented to frighten children, but a real fact. His father and uncle had killed some of them, for they were as bad as foxes for killing poultry. The old man attributed the extinction of the winged serpents to the fact that they were such terrors of the farmyards. Many more modern-day accounts have been collected by evangelist Jonathan Whitcomb, who brings us several reports from the UK. In October 1996, a man was out camping with friends in the Lake District of England when he saw, outlined against the moon-frosted clouds, a dark shape moving along at a good speed. He at first took it to be a balloon, but focusing on it he could see that it was in fact undulating slightly, and that it resembled a manta ray fish but with a short tail. He also noticed that the undulation he saw was caused by the flapping of the thing's massive wings, which are estimated as measuring around 35 feet from tip to tip. Whitcomb has also produced several odd reports from the countryside of Shropshire, England. One of them was related to him by a witness, who says she had her encounter as recently as 2017. The witness claims that she lives in a small town called Whitchurch, the oldest town in Shropshire, and located right near the border with Wales. The unnamed witness claims to live near a wilderness preserve area, and that she is very familiar with the birds in that place, as many species live in the region or pass through. On this day, she explains that she went out into her garden when she had a very unnerving experience, of which she says, "Well, on this particular morning I heard a very strange screech. I say strange, as I had never heard it before, and it was very loud, almost resounding. I could hear it getting closer across the way from behind the trees. I was curious as to what the sound was, but nothing prepared me for what I actually saw. I saw two pterodactyls side by side flying past the tree. Now at first I had to check myself, because the first thing I thought was, those are bloody big birds, that's no lie. But what struck me was that it had a giant-sized beak and the wings had no feathers. This was huge and flew directly past, so due to its size I could see it clearly, although it went past fast due to the size. It was grey in colour, both of them as far as I could tell. I have researched every bird in England, and even foreign birds that look similar, in any case had escaped, but the one thing is the sound. None of the birds sound like what I heard. I took a whole day pondering and wondering what I actually saw. I thought perhaps it was a toy, such as a small aeroplane or something, but they still look plastic and two-dimensional unless at a great distance, even the ones that flap their wings. It didn't flap its wings up and down like a toy. It was a very fluid motion, even coming across in a down to side motion. After a day of research, I kept the information to myself, except for my husband, who remained sceptical but listened very nicely. What I saw had no feathers, and its wings were almost bat-shaped. I had hoped someone else had seen it, or that it may have been reported, but as to this date no one has. I have done much research online, and the largest heron here still does not compare to what I saw. The legs are not long enough, and the beak is not as big, and the feathers are a major factor here. I cannot explain what I saw. It was like something out of a movie, but it was so quick I still disbelieve what I saw, and at the same time I know what I have seen. I don't know how something like that flying around was not seen by anyone else, as it was low flying, or how it could hide. But what I have told you is true. Although the witness remained sceptical herself at first, chalking it up to perhaps her imagination, her children would also see something strange in the sky not long after this. It would be enough to convince her to look into the phenomenon more. And she says, "My children were playing in the garden at around 10 a.m, and my son of 13 years came running into me saying he saw a giant big brown bird with huge wings. He did have a look of fright or concern on his face, so I knew immediately that he wasn't trying to pull my leg or was exaggerating. My younger daughter, who is 9, was with him and said she didn't see it, as she was playing by the trees, but she heard its sound. I asked her what the sound was. She happens to be a very good mimic when it comes to animals, and she made the sound that I had heard. I went through pictures of birds with my son. He said it was bigger than the eagles which usually fly around the area. He said it was brown with very long wings. I asked him if it had any feathers. He said he didn't know, he only saw it for a moment. So I showed him a picture of a pterodactyl and he said, yes, that's what it looked like. He said it moved very fast, like in stealth mode, and was chasing one of the eagles or hawks around. He said it was 2 to 3 times the size of the bird it was chasing. I found a better image online, but he said that it didn't have such a big head crest part, and the tail looked more like what he drew. As for my sighting, there was something trailing, but I thought it was the legs. But I didn't really focus or notice, as it happened so quickly. But to be honest, I would say I saw legs rather than a tail, and it had very long wings. An unrelated witness in the same general region would also report seeing something very similar in September of 2017, at a local nature reserve called Telford Town Park in Shropshire. He says that he was out hiking on a clear day when he had his experience, of which he explains, "I was travelling along the main trail. A creature with a wingspan of about 4 to 6 feet and a mottled greyish-brown coloration flew directly overhead and onwards towards a field where several horses are kept. I did have a smartphone that could take photos on my person, but it happened far too quick for me to have taken any. Our area does have nesting bats, which, to someone who has never seen one, can look very odd when flying, but this was way too big to have been a native bat species. Reports like this of living pterosaurs in the UK seem absurd. After all, how could it be that something like this could possibly exist in modern times in these areas? And if they do exist, why are reports so incredibly rare? What are these people seeing? Is this misidentification of birds or bats, or is it just tall tales? Firstly, the fossil record unequivocally suggests that pterosaurs became extinct at the end of the Cretaceous period along with the non-avian dinosaurs. If these animals had survived into the Cenozoic, we would expect them to have left at least some fossil remains, yet we have none. Secondly, how on earth could pterosaurs of the dimensions reported in these accounts be so infrequently seen? You would think that these animals would be caught on film, as we have a fantastic knowledge of Britain's native avifauna, all of which are far smaller than these supposed pterosaurs. For a viable breeding population, there would have to be hundreds of individuals, and surely some of these would leave behind evidence of their existence, such as carcasses, droppings and the like. In some sections of the cryptozoology community, it has been suggested with all seriousness that these mystery animals are not even corporeal, but are instead spirit beings or visitors from another dimension. Unless we have all secretly been living in an episode of Primeval, this is an incredibly flimsy excuse. Much like the pterosaurs themselves, none of these wormholes have ever been reported or studied by experts, and using the unproven to demonstrate the existence of unproven animals is highly questionable. Why can't these sightings simply be cases of mistaken identity? As I mentioned in my British Big Cats video, we as humans are poor at judging the size of distant moving targets, especially if seeing something unexpected. Reports of this nature always tend to overestimate the size of the animals concerned, and the brownish coloration and long wings mentioned in the reports sound an awful lot like buzzards or eagles native to the UK. Finally, I must question the motives of Jonathan Whitcomb in collecting these alleged pterosaur accounts. A devout biblical literalist, Whitcomb seems to believe that the presence of living pterosaurs would somehow prove the validity of his creationist beliefs. I'm not sure how this makes sense, given that these flying reptiles appear precisely nowhere in the Bible, and vague references to dragons or flying serpents don't count, as these bear no resemblance to real flying pterosaurs whatsoever. Also, all of Whitcomb's collected living pterosaur accounts describe animals that closely resemble outdated depictions of these creatures from the early 20th century, being described as naked, leathery winged, toothy beasts with long slim tails. Indeed, Whitcomb's pterosaurs call to mind plastic toys rather than real animals, with the head, beak and crest of Pteranodon and the teeth and tail of Rhamphorhynchus. The children's drawings of their flying beastie also resemble a Rhamphorhynchus, which is odd given that these small and fairly basal pterosaurs went extinct at the end of the Jurassic period. Why can't these modern sightings ever describe something that actually looks like a toothless late Cretaceous Asdarchid or Pteranodonted, rather than dragon-like monsters based on outdated pop culture depictions? If anything, these facts make British pterosaurs the most absurd of the cryptids I'd covered on this channel, and that is saying a lot. Thanks for watching everyone. Next week I'll be covering the taxonomically confusing Megaraptoran theropod dinosaurs. See you again soon. Cheerio.